and welcome back to another episode of The Book Stop. I'm your host Jen, and I'm very excited to talk about today's episode. But before we begin, there will be spoilers as we talk about major events that unfold within the story. In addition, each episode will have a list of trigger warnings in the description. Be sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at The Book Stop Podcast, and show your support on Patreon for early access to episodes and other additional content. And welcome back to another episode of The Book Stop. And we're starting the year out 2025 with a brand new guest. Who do we have here today?
Emilie.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey. Emilie, are you so excited to be here?
I am so excited.
I slide $20 over. Are you so excited to be here? No?
Yes, yes.
All right. What book did you bring for us to talk about today, and why did you bring this book?
I brought the book The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. Wanted to read it because I had just heard about the Radium Girls a couple months ago, and I thought it would be an interesting read.
And I would definitely say it was interesting. So, did you know anything about the Radium Girls prior?
I did not until I saw something about it, and then I knew I wanted to read the book.
Well, we're going to play a little game before we hop into it.
Okay.
So you're going to summarize this book in 30 seconds. Try your best, and you may begin whenever you're ready.
The story of the things that these girls went through is kind of amazing. Most of them were really young, 14 to 20, when they started at the radium plants. Literally lied to the whole time they worked there for no reason other than for the company to make more money. You learn a lot of stuff about radium in general that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to summarize it really quick for anybody who hasn't heard of the Radium Girls. I, for one, am one of those people. I didn't know anything about the Radium Girls before I started reading this book. A newly discovered element of radium makes gleaming headlines across the nation as the fresh face of beauty and the wonder drug of the medical community. From body lotion and toxin water, the popular new element shines bright in the otherwise dark years of the First World War. Meanwhile, hundreds of girls toil amidst the glowing dust of the radium dial factories. The glittering chemicals cover their bodies from head to toe. They light up the night like industrious fireflies. With such a glamorous job, these shining girls are the luckiest alive, until they become mysteriously ill. But the factories that once offered golden opportunities are now ignoring all claims of the gruesome side effects and the women's cry of corruption. As the fatal poison of the radium takes hold, the brave shining girls find themselves lost one of the biggest scandals of America's early 2000th century and the groundbreaking battle for workers' rights that will echo for centuries to come. Their courage led to life-changing regulations, research into nuclear bombing, and ultimately saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Like I was saying, yeah, I was very surprised that this story isn't taught in history class.
Yes.
I've never come across this at all. And I think that this is something that should be taught in class.
Absolutely.
But I don't know if it's, like, what the reasoning behind it is, like, why isn't it taught type deal. But I think it's very important, especially for, like, not only speaking out for yourselves, but also speaking out for others, of taking a step forward and just being like, hey, change needs to happen. This is how we make that change.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
to avoid repeating history.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know why. I mean, I went to school at a very different time than you did, and I never heard anything about this. And it's crazy to me that they wouldn't talk about it and let people know the struggles that these women went through and how it changed everything for everybody's future.
Yeah, because this takes place in the 1920s. World War I, women's suffrage, like all this stuff's going on as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, why isn't this being told?
Right.
I feel like this is a big motion towards all kinds of workplace regulations.
Absolutely.
But what do I know?
And it's crazy because you feel like it's because it's about women that it's not talked about as much.
Mm-hmm.
Because women weren't as important in the 1920s as they are today in society.
1,000%.
Yeah.
There's even a line in here that more says that, if this was a man or this happened to men,
yes,
it would have taken a faster and more delegated approach.
Absolutely.
People would have been jumping at the cause to help. But the girls that it happened to were pretty much begging for people to help.
Right. And most of them were very poor to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really want to step on any toes of anybody. And then when they tell them that they're fine, they just believe it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sad part of the whole thing.
Yeah. The biggest thing is, they didn't want to lose their job. Because it was a good paying job. People were bringing home, I think it said $20 a week. And back then, that was, over $200.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a good paying job for what they were doing. So it was at that point, were they taking it because it was a risk? And they're like, well, I'm making a lot of money. And it was also the front, helping the people on the front lines. So it was almost that patriotic.
Right.
So there was other things that were in the way. But no, I definitely agree that if it was a man.
Yeah.
So I have my favorite quote here, and it's a bit of a doozy. It's a long one, so bear with me. So my quote is about Grace Fryer, and we're going to be talking about Grace Fryer a lot. You smiled, so I hope you didn't bring the same exact quote.
That would be really fun. That would be fun.
Grace Fryer was never forgotten. She is still remembered now. You are still remembering her now. As a dial painter, she glowed gloriously from the radium powder. But as a woman, she shines through history with an even brighter glory. Stronger than the bones that broke inside of her. More powerful than the radium that killed her or the company that shamelessly lied through its teeth. Living longer than she ever did on Earth, but now she lives in the hearts and memories of those who know her only from her story. Grace Fryer, the girl who fought on when hope seemed gone, the woman who stood up for what was right, even as her world fell apart. Grace Fryer, who inspired so many to stand up for themselves. When Grace died, no radium company had been found guilty for killing its workers. No firm had been found at fault. Now, as Grace slept peacefully, others would take up her torch. Others would follow in her footsteps. Others would battle on as they continue to fight. For recognition, for justice.
Well, that is actually my same favorite quote in this book.
Oh my God. It's so good.
It's so good. It was, as soon as I read it, I was like, it touched me. They couldn't have said it any better.
No, absolutely. Yeah. This quote is so powerful because it shows you what the point of fighting is. At some point, you have to understand that it's not based off of you and your own circumstances, but you're fighting for the others that can't fight. For the people that don't have a voice, the ones that need a voice.
Yes.
And with their circumstances, which we're going to talk about through the rest of the podcast, with their circumstances being fatal, they had to have known that they were only reaching out and doing this for the people in the future.
Absolutely.
Because their destiny had been decided.
Yeah.
So, no, it's a great quote.
It was a great quote. I agree.
What are some things that you liked about this book?
I liked learning about the Radium Girls in general, but it did give you a lot of what they were going through and their struggles, some of their family stories.
Very personal.
It was very personal. I really did like to learn about these girls and their strengths. Mm-hmm. The strength that they had was amazing. To go through all of this and to still just keep fighting, and some of them until right before they passed away. It was insane. No,
absolutely. We're going to talk about what radium is and what exactly happened to these girls. So if you're listening to this and you've never read the book, we're definitely going to go into some detail. And it does get kind of gruesome, so be wary of that. But when this book goes into detail, too, about what exactly happens to these girls. But just for the gist of it, the main thing is their bones are literally decaying as they're still living. Some people were having their jaw come in through their mouth. It was just filled with blood, and And, like, they still do this even though they're writhing in pain. They still get up every day and go. Like, even Catherine went to courtroom.
Yes.
They had to carry her up the stairs.
She was, what, at that point, 60 pounds?
Yeah, when she died, she was 60 pounds, yeah.
Yeah, so I think she was like, they said 72 or something.
Yeah.
And then to be carried into the courtroom just because she wanted to make a stand.
It's not only, like, mental strength, but also, like, actual physical strength to get in there.
Yes.
And then during the courtroom, they even had, like, a bedside hearing to her.
They went to her home.
They went to her, okay, yeah. Which was very nice of them to do that. But, yeah, it took an immense amount of strength for them.
Absolutely. I think that was even unheard of, even then in the 1920s, early 30s, to bring a court to someone's home just so that they can still testify. And it pushed her so far that she didn't have much strength after that. Yeah.
I'm honestly shocked they didn't use it against her. Like, oh, she can't make it here.
Right.
So she doesn't really want to testify.
Yes,
like, that's why I'm saying it's
especially the Radium Company.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They were trying to use everything against these girls. Just lies.
Yeah. This, you know what? That's actually so much. So this book made me so mad.
Yes.
I would be listening to it. I would literally be like, oh my God. The stuff that this Radium Company did and, like, said to these, about and to these girls, I was just like, I was so frustrated. I've never been angry like that before.
Yeah.
Where I felt so bad for these girls who tried everything that they could to make sure that they got justice.
Yeah.
And in the end, they did get justice, which is good not only for them, but for the history of it. But, yeah, the entire time I was just like, the things that they did, the loopholes that they created.
Oh, yeah.
Was just awful.
Yeah. It was crazy because most of these girls were going completely bankrupt because they kept going to doctors and nobody could help them. Nobody knew what was going on with them. And they were just trying to get help. And then this company is just lying and making up all of this stuff. They were just unhealthy when they started working there.
Yeah. They were saying, like, oh, typical hormones. Or, oh my gosh, when Molly died and they said it was syphilis.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. That was so terrible because then she was, like, frowned on, and I'm sure her family was, by the whole city that she lived in. And it was a complete lie. The fact that a lot of the doctors in this book that are supposed to be helping people, they literally were lying to the women. And they were bought off by this big company.
Yep. This is why you never go to a male doctor. Just kidding. But, like, specifically Dr. Flynn, I think it is.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Flynn. Oh!
Yes.
Dr. Flynn would hate to see me coming. When he was like, I'm a doctor, but, what was it? Psychology?
Yeah.
Or, like, philosophy or something?
Philosophy, I think.
He wasn't even a real medical doctor.
Right.
When I read that, oh my God, my heart dropped. I was like, are you kidding me?
And he was doing examinations on these women. Like, full-on examinations.
Yeah.
And then stating that they were fine. And never gave them, the women, any of the results.
Yeah.
That was the part that killed me. Like, they never had access to their own medical records.
Yeah. So it was completely word to mouth.
Yes.
That's the craziest thing, is like, you're supposed to go to a doctor and trusting that they're going to tell you the truth and that they're going to do what they have to do. But it's like, the fact that they got bought off by the company.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a lawyer too that had the same thing? Where he's like, I'm going to tell the girls there's something going on, but you're going to have to pay me. And then the Radium Company's like, no, we're not doing that.
Dr. Flynn too? I don't.
There was
somebody, that was ridiculous, and I couldn't believe. I think it was another doctor, actually, that did that. That said they could pay him off. They did not do that.
It was like morally disgusting. Like, it made me feel so angry for these girls because they're oblivious. They're completely innocent and ignorant to the idea that this is going on. It just makes the whole thing worse because it's like you're seeing the struggle that they're going through, that they have no idea how worse it's going to get.
Right.
So,
and most of them didn't even know they were fatal until weeks before their death.
Yeah. And then during the trial, when they're like pretty much confirmed that they're fatal, because some girls didn't know or believe it. And then they started sobbing in the courtroom. Oh, that was also bad.
That was a very heartwarming moment in the book.
Yeah.
It felt really real when you're reading it. Oh my gosh. They still had hope and had no idea. They had no idea that they had no hope whatsoever, really. There was no hope for them to recover.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the motives of them doing this, was because they wanted justice and the repercussions of what happened. But I think a lot of them were holding out hope that if they get this money, they can go to a doctor that specializes in like chemical exposure and like radiation exposure. But when they kind of confirmed like, hey, this is the end of the path for you, it was just kind of like a heartbreaking moment because the narrator specifically said like they broke down in sobs in the courtroom.
Yeah. Radium was so new that there was nobody who specialized in it. The girls didn't know that. You just think there's got to be somebody out there that can help you. I really liked when they were finally getting justice. The rest of it just kind of made me mad. It really did. I liked that part of the story the most because you kind of got to hear even more about certain women in this story. In the beginning of the story, they talked about many different women that you didn't really find out a lot about them necessarily. You know, just that they worked there and they started having pains. And I really liked once finally Raymond Barry came in, and he was an attorney who agreed to help these girls when no one else would. These girls went to multiple attorneys and tried to get somebody to take their case. But then he finally helped a couple of them and win lawsuits. But the Radium Dial Corporation, they made him sign the last case that he won, that he would not help any other women to bring a lawsuit to them. And I thought that was kind of crazy that they could do that, because he was actually the only one that would help them.
No, the Radium Company is a snake, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Like the way that when the trials happened, it started in April. Or like when things started getting motion, it started in April. And they were like, oh, let's circle back in September, knowing full well that the girls would be dead by then.
Yes.
And then when it got to September, some of them were still alive. So they're like, oh, let's postpone it. And the court's like, no, we're not postponing it. These girls aren't going to last much longer.
Yeah, and then they were saying that if the girls passed away before then their case would be ended. That's insane to me that they would do that to these people.
These girls that literally were just doing a job and that they lied about. Like, they're the ones that specifically was like, oh, there's no harm in the paint. Yes. There's no harm in it. You know what? We won't even get into it right now because I'll go off. We still got some things to do. We're going to talk about the Radium Company and how much of a snake they are. Yeah. Some things that I liked about the story. I looked at it more of a narrative look. I did really like learning something new. I didn't know anything. I had no clue about this. It's absolutely wild to me. So it was really cool to like learn about it. And after I read the book, I did like my own research, looked up some YouTube videos, and I watched the movie as well. And I was just like baffled by this, of how behind the scenes, and it's like, this should be more known. This should be taught in school. This should be released to the public. Like, we need more information. I will say Kate Moore did a great job with the research on this. Like, she did immense research. I don't know how long it took her to write this book. I'm guessing years upon years with the amount of history and information that's in this book.
Yes.
She cites a lot of her sources, so this is a very historical base, so it pulls a lot of quotes from other sources of media, like research papers and news articles and books and, all sorts of different medias at the time. There's also interviews in it. So there is a lot of quotable moments that she pulls into the book, which makes it feel more real. I think the narrative was very, very interesting. It was nothing I read before where it felt very it jumped between informational base, that historical side, but then it also went to a little bit a storytelling side where you were in the scene with them. And then she'd be this character said this character said that. Let's take a commercial break to learn all this history. And then let's get back to the movie.
Right.
That's what it felt like to me.
It kind of did.
I really appreciated the translation of money. It would say, they made X amount of dollars, which today would be this much. Yeah. Which I really appreciate because it put more incentive on things and more understanding. So it was they won $10,000, which is $1 million today. And I'm oh, because when I think 10,000, I'm they deserve way more than that.
Right.
Oh, it's $10 million or something crazy. And I was oh, shoot. Okay, yeah, that's what they deserve. Good. And then they got $600 annually for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And I was $600 for their entire lives? And I was oh, that's $50,000. Right. Got it. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. And the last thing I put was that I really liked the details and that it didn't hold back anything with the girls. It really showed how painful it was. It went into detail about some of the gorier aspect, not super, super detail.
Right.
But detailed enough where you really understood what was going on and you're okay, now I can see why. I think really helped with the cause.
I do think it's kind of crazy that this book was written in 2017. Almost 100 years after this happened, mm-hmm. and there was nothing before that. Yeah. How did she come up with all of these facts in this book? Mm-hmm. And nobody wrote a book about it before then. That's really interesting to me.
That was something that I actually want to talk about for one of my dislikes, is that it's very researched, but I feel some details fall behind because of everything that's in there and it gets lost. But it's really hard to figure out how much of it is real because a lot of it does feel a little bit fictionalized. And I think that is hard with writing any type of memoir. I said the same thing when I did The Glass Castle. That was my second episode. Throwback. I think doing any kind of memoirs, especially years ago, is so hard because some of it has to be fictional.
Right.
Especially this goes really into these thoughts were given. These words were shared.
Right.
But I'm you can't record every single thing. So there's a little bit of fiction within the story because she's trying to tell a story where you're almost in the scene with them. So she has to pull in a little bit of her own imagination to it. But she does pull a lot of inspiration from other things.
Yes.
With this, it's how do you go so long without any sort of inscription of what happened?
But she does talk about she wrote this person a letter that said this, and mm-hmm. you're all of these letters were saved somehow.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Now that you bring that up, it really does. It feels like there is stuff that's kind of added in there just to make it feel so you feel more for these women. Mm-hmm. Not to say that they weren't going through things, but right. There's a lot. Mm-hmm. That feels how would she know this 100 years later?
Exactly.
Okay, not 100, but 89.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There was a scene where she's Catherine went to the doctor, and after she thought about all the things the doctor said. Well, how do you know that?
Right.
There's a little bit of almost a little flourish in there.
Yes.
To add the sympathetic side. You can very, very well tell that Kate had a voice in this.
Yes.
She was very on the sympathetic side and angry about the things that these people did. Rightfully so.
Absolutely.
That's another hard thing with writing historical is that you have to be very neutral in it. And I think maybe that's why a lot of people were afraid of writing. Because they had to be very neutral with it. And she was just I'm doing my own thing. I don't care.
Yeah. I'm glad she did, though, because it really brought you more into personal lives of these people. I had said in the beginning of the book, it felt very, almost like just reading a news article. Mm-hmm. Many news articles that just kept breaking off. But then when you get towards the end of the book, she gets more personal. Like, she's putting her own spin on it, adding more to these people's lives, which brings you more into the book.
Yeah.
And into the story.
Approaching the girls with a more, like, I guess more personal details changes the engagement the book has. Because I feel like if you're just staring at news articles and it's just over and over and over information, her most important thing was telling a story and making sure that whoever reads this book understood the struggles and can come at it with a different aspect than just being like, okay, this girl got X amount for this week and she died on X day. I think it adds a little bit more of an appreciation to it because you're able to see it and almost like relate to these girls because they feel like people.
Yes.
And I think that's what she was trying to go with.
Yeah.
A more humane look.
But I feel like that was more at the end, after the first couple hundred pages.
Yeah.
And then it really became a more interesting read to me. I learned more about these girls and their struggles. The beginning of the book, you learn about a lot of girls and a lot of things, and you learn about when the girls all started working there, they would paint themselves in radium, and they would have parties, and they were like the best dressed women in the whole towns, and that was really, I think, important to the story. But then there was a lot in there that I felt was a little too much. But I liked the book after page 180.
Yeah, when we got to part 3, that's when it really, like, that was the courtroom and getting, like, the final answers to everything.
Right.
No, I absolutely agree. It was very confusing to tell the people apart because they were getting all these people, and I get it. I totally get it. Like, you want to recognize everybody that went through this. I think we could have definitely, and we'll talk about it during missed opportunities, but I think we could definitely single out, which sounds so bad, but in a narrative standpoint, like signal out the people that had the most. And I know that she did that with Molly and Grace and Catherine, but all of the other names, it was just like, I couldn't focus on anybody.
Yeah, either could I. I was like, I don't remember who this is. She would bring them up in one section of the book, and then that was it, just their names and how old they were pretty much. And then you are maybe 8 chapters away, and then their name comes up again, and I'm like, I don't remember this one. But so it was hard for me to keep reading in the beginning because I'm like, this is like, it's too much information that I can't retain it all.
Yeah.
But then once she started talking about actual cases, the justice part, you're right. It really brought me in, and I read that really fast. It was very easy to read. The
issue, I think, overall, is just that it's too long.
Yeah.
I did not know it was this long. It's like 400 and something pages, or like on the cusp of 400.
Yes.
And when I got the audiobook, I was like, oh my God, this is a long book. And I picked up the book and I was like, oh my God, this is a long book. Which it's an average sized book, but for what I was expecting, it was a lot longer. And I think we could have definitely taken out some of the, it's again really rude to say less important stuff about things in history, but there are some things in here that I did not need to know. Like, as much as I love Theodore and Theodore Sr., I didn't need to know their entire life story, and I didn't need to know that he ended up marrying her because they were best friends and he didn't want her to die alone. Like, I don't need to know all that. Like, I get it. You want the girls to be relatable, but at the end of the day, you're trying to tell a historical fact. So you need to stick to the historical stuff, so.
Yes, and I think she could have just picked less. Doesn't discount the other people who had gone through the same things. It's just if you pick a select few, then you definitely get more information. You understand more about what's going on with them than to say, okay, well, this one, she had knee pain and then she died. That doesn't really...
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah. It gets into the nitty-gritty of a lot of stuff. It gets into a lot of the radium, which we're going to talk about in a second. To an extent, I understand. But I think it, highlights over a lot of things, but it downgrades a lot of things. Like, I didn't understand what radium was doing to the body until I went back and looked at it. And I was like, because there's a line in here that it says that the radium in our bodies replaces it as calcium. Yes. And I didn't know that until I went back, and I was like, why is this happening to them?
Yeah.
Because it glazes over it.
Yeah.
I feel like there is some points that she could have brought out and like pulled out of the story that was a little bit more imperative. It's not so bad. We could have put some of the other girls that were part of the history that didn't have as much of an impact in the back of the book.
Right.
Under the acknowledgments. Be like, here are all the other girls.
But I'm sure that there's no way that she could even...
It was 4,000 women.
Yeah. No way she could put all of these girls in there. So so to randomly put them just sporadically, it didn't help the story at all to me. It helped the story more to me to find out what it was doing to them and actually have them have justice and to stop this from happening to anybody else. That helped the story more to me than the random facts. And again, you don't want to discount any one person, but if you don't have enough facts about them or information about them, then they don't really need to be in the story.
Yeah, because not only does it go through these girls, it goes through the Radium Dial Corporation, the owner and the founder and all the people that work there. It goes into the doctors, the dentists, the husbands and the children and the parents, all these other people like the attorneys. It goes into everybody. And there's so many names flying around. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. She did put a list of characters in the front of the book, and they are labeled, which I do really appreciate. That does definitely help. But it's in alphabetical order, so like the person that was mentioned the most is not even at the top. It was just a little too much of a little bit of everything.
Yes.
And I think we could have pulled it back.
Yeah, and like you said, it says a list of key characters, and the key characters is 4 pages long.
Yeah.
So that in itself should tell you there's a lot of characters in here, and I would say that most of them that are in this list were not key characters to me. I couldn't tell you who some of these people were in the list because they were mentioned so infrequently or shortly. Like this one, it says Josephine Smith, Genevieve Smith's sister. I don't remember either of those in this book. They mentioned sisters and cousins and it was a lot. But I'm sure these women all had died. So then you have all of the family is what really gives the information. Yeah.
So I want to talk about radium really quick. Another element I have no idea about, and I'm not a science girly, so it's not that surprising.
Right.
It was founded by Marie and Perry. Perry? I think it's really funny that their names rhyme.
Right.
And they rhyme with their last names. It was founded in 1898. When the radium was discovered, it kind of hit this like big craze. It was promoted as a super healthy thing. It was in everything.
Yes.
It was in toothpaste. It was in makeup. It was in water. It was in everything. And pretty much if you don't know what radium is, it is that mineral that makes things glow in the dark. At a very, very low quantity. I want to say like a gram of it was like $20,000 back in the day. That's what they were using in the paint when they were working under the Radium Dial, United States Radium Corporation. And they were making watches for the men overseas. And so they needed like the little glow in the dark little thingies so they can see at night, right? And so they were painting these tiny little numbers on the watches. And so whenever they're painting, they use these tiny, tiny little brushes. The only way that they could get the brushes to thin enough was that they had to do something called lip pointing, where they had to put the brush in the paint and then they would have to lick it or like point it with their lips to make it nice and thin so that way they can get into the paint.
They were told to do the lip pointing because that was the best way to make the brush to the point that they needed it to be. That's the craziest part, is that they were literally instructed to do it this way.
And then they sit there and say, oh, we never said that.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that made me mad. It got to the point where even Pierre, who is the co-founder, I mean, Mary founded and, like, created the Radium, but Pierre was her husband, and he was like, oh, I wouldn't even go in a room with Radium because I'm afraid it's going to kill me. And you're sitting here and you're putting in all this stuff, and you're putting it in this paint. And girls were wearing it on their nails. They were putting them on their teeth to make their teeth shine.
Yes.
Like, oh my God. They would put it on their bodies when they go out, and they were considered the shining girls because they would literally be glowing in the dark. And like that was the motive that they used, was like, oh, it's safe because it's in everything. So it's safe in our paint too. Yeah. So like that's why the girls were just like, oh yeah, you're right.
Like you said, they put it in tonic water, and only like the very elite, rich people could purchase this tonic water. And I found it really interesting when they said that the man who had died, and he was a rich and famous man, and then all of a sudden, radium being poisonous became more to light. That was insane to me, because in the very first chapter, I read it and I literally like stopped and told my husband, I'm like, oh my gosh, they had this in toothpaste. They had it in everything, because people thought this was like a wonder drug and it would heal you and make you better. They didn't do any research on it. That was crazy to me. It was, I stopped and I like literally had to tell him, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Because of the lack of research, it doesn't have any effect on us now. So like, why would we care? It's making me money. And that's all they cared about. Yeah, but with the Radium Girls, they did the lip pointing, and over the course of a couple of years, they started noticing that they were breaking out really bad. They were getting like acne. And again, hormones. You're just a teenager, because a lot of them were teenagers. I think the youngest was like 13, 11, like right in there. Yeah. And the oldest was like, I think the oldest that they had working there was 27. When the 13 and 15 and 17-year-olds were breaking out, they're like, it's just normal.
Yeah.
And then the next day they were coming in with like bruises on their face, and, their teeth were falling out because the radium disguises itself as calcium, and it went into their body and was like breaking down the bone and like devouring it from the inside. It started in their jaw, obviously, because that they were doing the lip pointing. Yeah. And it was getting to the point where people's like their faces would like blow up with like pus and blood.
Yes.
And there was a picture of a girl that like her entire jaw was just huge. And then it eventually went down to the rest of their body, like their spines and their legs, and some women couldn't even walk. They had to wear like the braces on their body to be able to stand up straight.
Yes.
Which is concerning, because it's like, what about all the people that had like the toothbrush? Yeah. I guess it wasn't direct like the paint was.
I don't know. I know the toothpaste,
Did I say toothbrush?
Yeah.
Toothpaste, yeah.
Yeah, the toothpaste. It didn't take much to actually start poisoning their bodies. And part in the book that got me first was literally the part where the young lady was at the dentist and she had a tooth taken out, and then it wouldn't heal, and then she kept going back to the dentist, and then the dentist like went to push on her jaw, and her jaw literally broke in his hand and came out of her mouth. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh. That one got me. Like, I didn't even think that was possible, that your jaw could just fall out of your mouth.
Because it came through the hole, I'm guessing? No, or it just came right through?
It came out into her mouth, out of her mouth. Like, how does that happen?
I have no idea. I don't know. It's just...
How do you survive after that happens? Like, you can't eat. The pain.
The girls, like, their legs would be shorter over the year. Like, one leg would start to, like, shrink. That their bodies were, like, actual skeletons. Yeah. Over the courses of, like, a couple of years. Yeah. And that's the crazy thing to me, is, like, how fast it takes over.
Yes.
Because radium has such a long lifespan. It said that they have 1,600 life. They were saying that the girls' bones in their caskets are still glowing to this day. Yes. Which is insane.
That's crazy to me. It was a young lady who her leg she was having a lot of pain in her leg, and her leg was getting shorter, and then they said that her leg had died before she did. Bone is dead, and they opened up the bones, and the bone marrow looked nothing like it was supposed to. There were a lot of gruesome details in here that kind of feel their pain a little, but there's no way you could.
You can't understand it because it's not something that we go through because of the regulations that they set. So, so we can't possibly.
And I'm glad I never have to go through that.
Yeah.
And nobody I know ever has to go through that.
I think it was interesting how they went through the testing as well, because the only way that they could test if there was radiums in the bone, took the bones and burned them down with like a certain chemical. I can't remember what the chemical was. And then they tested it and that they had radium. And the only way they could do that was like if they had passed.
Yes.
So it's like, it's so bad. But they would literally pull the bodies back up so they can test it. And that's what they did with Molly, who died of syphilis, quotation marks. And then she finally was able to be laid to rest with the actual reasoning, which I was like, finally, that she got her justice, even though she died, one of the first to die. And then, hold on a second. And then the whole thing about them being like radium dial shenanigans. They were even getting down to the nitty gritty of the phrasing. Like just being like, radium poisoning isn't the same as like radium exposure. And we're like, what? Because the number one thing they would ask when they went to go see the doctors is like, where do you work? And they would be like, oh, we work at Radium. And so they were trying to convince the company that they weren't actually using radium. They were using was it phosphorus? Phosphorus? Phosphorus is not even a word.
In the first thing is there was a couple different radium dial painting plants. The one in Ottawa. And they were trying to say, well, we don't use the same thing as they do. They use phosphorus in their painting. So then these girls had phosphorus poisoning, which was a complete lie. The thing that killed me most about this book was even at the end where they're talking about all these women who had died, and then they say, was this on their death certificate? That one killed me, because every one of them said, no, it wasn't due to their occupation. Yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then finally they got a yes.
There was a girl, Quinta, who lost her arm because they amputated it. When they amputated her arm, because it was gone already, why didn't they just burn down the arm and just be like, okay, this literally just left this girl's body and I'm burning it right in front of you. Here's the radium poisoning.
Yeah.
Here's all the proof you need.
She was a case that it actually caused a cancerous sarcoma on her elbow, I think. And that's what happened. A lot of them started getting cancerous tumors in different places on their body. They said either you lose your arm or you die. When her jaw fell out of her mouth, why didn't they take that bone? They said it was literally riddled with holes. It had just been eaten through by radium.
I don't know. It's just, I think it's an interesting aspect of the story that, like, the loopholes that they were going through to make sure that they weren't going to be the ones that were at fault when they clearly were at fault.
Yes.
So who would you say is your favorite character?
I would say Catherine Donahue. I really liked Catherine and her gumption that she had. Like, she literally was bedridden and still did a testimony for court. She wanted so much for her husband and her children to be okay after she passed away that she kept going and kept going. And I don't know how she made it. They had the first court date and then they pushed it so far longer. And I don't know how she kept going. And she did. And she made it almost to the very end. She really was such a strong woman because she had this family and her husband that was a very strong supporter.
I definitely agree. That shred of hope definitely kept her going. She wanted to see it to the end. Her body was essentially shutting down, but she kept pushing on so that way she could at some point get the justice that she deserved. Every girl had her own motion within it, but it is good to recognize the people that did stand out a little bit more. And then she was the one that was wearing the black dress with the polka dots.
Yeah.
I think that was a great little callback within that scene too, because that was like the first thing we saw her in, and then to see her at the end with it was a good callback. I said that my favorite character was Grace. When I started liking her was this quote right here. So it says, "From the start, Grace bore her diagnosis bravely. She had a courageous spirit and refused to let Martland's prognosis affect her life. She had always loved her life, and if anything, she now valued it even more highly. She tucked it away inside her mind and carried on. She didn't stop working. She didn't change her habits. She kept swimming. She kept socializing with her friends, and she kept on going to the theater. I don't believe in giving up," is what she said. I just really liked Grace. I think that, Grace is the one that took initiative. Obviously the whole group did, but she's the one that was like, "Oh, we're going to start this lawsuit.
Yes.
We're going to move forward with this because I'm not going down without a fight, and you shouldn't either." So, stood out to me the most. We had Molly and Catherine, but Grace is the one that took the steps that needed to be taken.
She was definitely a very strong woman, and to keep going, even though she felt terrible every single day. Yeah, she was a person.
Yeah.
Did make a lot of things happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's like the highlight of it is like their pain kind of gets subsided because you obviously can't feel it. But they were in like such excruciating pain that they couldn't do anything. And to still move forward, it's like you get to the point where you just want to give up. Yeah. And a lot of girls did. They were just like, "I give up. There's nothing I can do. I have less than a year to live. So what's the point of going and fighting when it's not going to mean anything to me at the end?"
Right.
Where Grace is like, "Well, it's not about me. It's about all the girls that are also being affected and the girls in the future that are going to be affected."
Yeah, she was very detrimental to the beginning of justice for the Radium Girls. Kept going until she couldn't go anymore.
Absolutely. You know who my least favorite character is?
Who's that?
Let me give you a name. Let me read this entire thing, right? Clarence Lee, George Willis, Harold Vinet, Howard Baker. I hate all of those people. All the people for the Radium Company. Corruption within the industry itself. Yeah. And it makes me think, how different today would it be if the Radium Girls had not fought back against the Radium Company?
Yeah.
How long would it have taken? Because this was 100 years ago, but in the grand scheme of things, it was 100 years ago.
Right.
Well, how crazy and how messed up would the world be if those regulations were never set? How long would it have taken? Because it took them so long for just that short period with dramatic effects happening to them.
Yes.
What if it was something that was not as noticeable? People weren't dying as fast. Yeah. What if it took 100 years for the radium to set in? It's just crazy to think of how much it would have changed.
Seven von Shikaki?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's it. He's the one that literally told them, "Don't put the pain in your mouth, it'll harm you." Mm-hmm. And then came back in court and said, "No, I never said that."
I didn't say that.
Yeah. He was like my least favorite character because you literally said this to someone's face. Then he even said, "Yes, I did say that," to her face. But then when it came to court, he lied on the stand and said, "Oh, I never said that." What? How could you do that? How could you have no regard for these women's lives?
It's literally the endless battle of morale versus money.
Yes.
Always. They went so far, bought people out to keep the secret because they were making so much money.
Yeah.
The morale behind that is these girls are dying. You should take recommendation of what you did to these girls.
Yeah.
But they're just like, nah.
We don't care.
Nah.
We don't care. We still have money. We still have everything that we could want as the executors or executives of the companies.
There's a thin line between not knowing and knowing. Genuinely didn't know, then that's on them for being ignorant at the time. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they knew and still fought against it is the part that baffles me so much. And the fact that guy wasn't an actual doctor. That one still bothers me. So.
Yeah, that one does bother me too. When I read that, I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
My jaw hit the ground. I was like, what?
I also didn't like the part where there was a gentleman who came in and did studies and said that the radium was poisonous and harming these girls, and then it was never published.
Yeah.
The company kiboshed it pretty much, put it under the rug and said, no, it's safe, it's fine. How does that happen? We're really lucky almost to live in a time where this couldn't happen again. Because there is so much with social media and you know so much about what's going on around the world. But 100 years ago, the people in Ottawa didn't know what was happening in this plant. There was no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there wasn't like a computer or a TV or even phone calls where I don't even know if you could call. And I think it was like an operator where you literally couldn't call a long distance like that.
Mm-hmm.
You could only call in your immediate areas. So people didn't know what was going on. And it wasn't even that far away. But now this could never happen. Yeah. Because there's so much information, maybe too much information, but so much information out there that you can find out what's going on in some remote island on the other side of the world.
Yeah. With them getting help too, it's like they had no resources.
Yes.
Because everybody that they reached out to, doctors or lawyers, were like, well, we don't know what's going on. So like when Grossman comes, he comes 2 days before the final trial. Yeah. And luckily he was able to help them, but it's like no one's going to step in against a corporation that big knowing that their reputation's on the line. The morale versus the money. They're not going to step in and take the possible effect that they're wrong.
Right.
The sliver of chance that they're wrong, because it could have been something else.
Right.
The lack of knowledge is what unfortunately steps in the way of justice.
Yeah. And Grossman did it all for free.
Mm-hmm.
Started this case with no money up front. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing to me because that was the problem with a lot of the lawyers. They wanted so much up front. Women were already bankrupt. Like to go to a doctor then was the equivalent of $200. If you're not even making that in a week and you have other things to pay, he was like, yes, I'll take your case, and worked his butt off.
He did.
Trying to get them a verdict, the right verdict.
A lot of the lawyers that they got to help was like, just settle. Just settle for the X amount of money. I think it was like $1,000 or something. Yeah. They're like, just settle for the money that you're going to get because you're not going to win. And you don't got a lot of time.
Yeah.
And that's just awful. And like, Grossman coming in, he was a great asset to them. He helped supported the women's suffrage as well. So that was a great little corruption within. And like how much they were trying to hide. And again, that knowledge of like, they could hide so much of it. Because no one was going to really question them because it's just a bunch of women.
When the women did try to stand up to the dial companies, and then even people in their own town were looking down on them because this was like the main source of money in this whole town. So they were afraid. They were like ousted by the whole town because they said something against the radium company. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy to me. Like, even your neighbors are now against you because you're trying to fight for your life.
Yeah. Literally.
Fight, and they don't believe it because this company claims we're so clean and we're the cleanest company around and this isn't harmful. And when they posted that flyer in the newspaper multiple times about how great that it was. And then that was one of my favorite parts when they came back to court later on. And then the Radium Dial company is like, we never said it was good. And they're like, well, what about this whole flyer you posted in the newspaper multiple times?
Like tripping them up, like getting a loophole on them. Yeah. You know, this company comes in and it's doing so great and everybody needs a job. Yeah. And the women finally are able to get a job. And there wasn't a lot of choices then. I know some of the women ended up leaving and that wasn't available to everybody.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they needed this job. But it was going to the point where you went over to work every day and they told you to do the lip pointing.
Yeah.
Because the more you did the lip pointing, the more dials you did, the more money you made.
Yes, because you got paid by the dial.
Yeah, it was 1 cent per dial.
Not by the hour. And these women would work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day or something.
Yeah, they eventually moved to a 6-day. So they would work every single day except for Sunday, of course. And so they would be there from pretty much dusk till dawn.
Yeah.
And just work. I'm surprised they didn't make him work at night because it does glow in the dark.
Right.
So I'm just sitting here like, okay, how important are watches at night? All of this for watches.
Well,
so,
it was, I mean, most of the radium, the painting came during the war because they were painting these for the soldiers. Does the soldier need to know what time it is that badly that people can die?
Yeah.
Right.
Look at the moon. I don't know. Track the moon.
Yeah.
But I think it was like after the war, people would come home and then the army men would be wearing the watches. Yeah. And so that picked up because they're like, oh, I want that too.
And they did alarm clocks.
They did branch out. But no, it was just... all of this for watches is literally crazy.
Yeah. It is a long book. And like you said, we could talk for days, I think, about the anger. It's really the anger. Yeah. The anger that you feel reading this book.
I feel like reading it as women, we have a little bit more of a justifiable anger towards it. But so I just want to take a second here to shout out our lovely Patreon subscribers.
All right. Let's hear it for Nick W., Bree P., Ashley A., Tim O., Anastasia R., Janeth P., Emilie P., oh, that's me, Patrick C., Mike T., Tracy H., Stephanie A., Sean A., Kim L., Hunter H., Jake R., Jean C., and Lulu.
Thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast. It truly, truly means the world for me. This is the 5th year anniversary of doing a podcast, which is absolutely insane. No, I can't believe we're already 5 years in. This is going to be a great lineup this year. I am very excited. I'm reading some books that I've been wanting to read for a long time, and I'm getting new people on the podcast, which is always exciting to do, like something new. Of course, we love having the usuals on, but it's nice for like somebody else to come on and experience it for the first time. So thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast. If you guys want to be part of the Patreon shout out, head over to Patreon and subscribe today. So who would you say in this one is your favorite relationship?
I liked Tom and Catherine Donahue because they talked a lot about them. Catherine is the one that she had to be carried to the courtroom, especially in that time, time period. It felt like he was just an amazing husband and fought for his wife so much. I really liked their whole story and how much you heard about it, because this was a blue-collar worker in the 1920s, 1930s. Men didn't show very much emotion, but you felt for him as well as being the husband of Catherine, who had to watch her go through this and know that they have 2 small children. And he just fought and fought for her. Like when she couldn't go to the court, he went in her place. And that relationship and story of it felt really like she touched on a lot of their relationship in general. He loved her. He went back to court after that. She's the one that didn't realize that she was terminal and it was fatal until in the courtroom. She was one of the girls. And he went back and heard all of the outcome and still stuck with it. And I thought that was kind of amazing to me. Truly loved her. There was no doubt in that.
Very into detail about a lot of the husbands. Some of the men, even at the point of they are being taken over with the radium, some of the men married the women because of this. Yeah. And they just wanted them to be happy and being able to like support them. Like Theo, he literally went bankrupt pretty much to make sure that his wife was okay.
And his father.
Yeah, and his father. He took, all of it. And again, that's where like having that more personal side, this is not only affecting the girls, but their entire families as well, which puts even more pressure on how the outcome comes out.
Yes.
So, no, absolutely. I said that my favorite relationship would be Grossman and the Radium Girls. When he came in, no strings attached. He just took the job and was like, we're doing this. I think it was less of a sympathetic, like, oh, I feel bad for you, but a genuine need to right the wrongs and help the girls that desperately needed it. He just came and he jumped right into it, and he was able to get them exactly what they needed. And of course, we love a man that support women. So
yeah.
So yeah, I just really liked their dynamic as the story ended. Unfortunately, he did come in towards the end there, so he didn't ask any questions within the morals of what they were doing. He was just like, this is wrong, and I want to do what I need to do to fix it.
Quite amazing in that story because he really took charge.
Yeah.
The only thing that I really wish that I could learn, and I will probably do some research on this, is what happened to the children?
Mm-hmm.
Like, were they affected by this radium as well? Because they were in their mother's wombs
Mm-hmm.
when they had radium in their bodies, and you didn't really hear anything about that at all.
That's true.
You only heard about Mary Jane, Catherine and Tom's daughter, who was very small, 1 year old, 10 pounds. What were the long-term effects of the children that came after? And what about the people that lived with them? As a husband and wife, you have contact with your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Did this affect any of the husbands as well?
That's true. Like, while they were at work?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if it has to be, like, in a direct... Because it went into their body and into their bloodstream and into their bones. So I don't know if it, like, left residue in their mouth. And it could be as simple as sharing a drink with them.
Yes.
Does it transport like the flu does? Like, the bacteria of it?
Right.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Or a good night kit. They don't really read into that at all about what it might have done. They tell you about, there was a poor young woman who had 3 miscarriages after working at the radium plant. But there were women who carried children and delivered them. And you just wonder, like, what happened? How were their lives?
Which
too?
is insane that they had children.
Yeah.
Most of them, didn't they carry to full term? Some of them
were early. Yeah. Mary Jane was supposed to be full term. And then she was still tiny. She was this tiny baby. And these women all, they were very young when they started working there. And then they became of childbearing age. Like, they got married, they wanted to have families. And so they didn't know anything was wrong with them. They kept telling them everything was fine.
Yeah.
And so, like, how many children were born out of these women? What was the outcome for them?
Because, like, how much of that affects the children that are after, and did it cause any mutations after? I'm guessing probably not, if we haven't really heard anything, because I feel like that's something more would definitely approach. Did this kid have, like, does his nails grow automatically because it's in his bones? Like,
yeah.
And there was a scene when she was talking about one of the women's. They were so skinny that you could see her bones glowing under her skin.
Yes.
That is insane to me.
That was Catherine, I think. She would lay in the bed because she was bedridden in the living room. And at night, you could literally see her bones glowing.
Yeah. Does that affect the baby at that point?
Right.
Like, I would love to know how far it went within the descendant line, too. Is it, like, something that stays with... Because it lives for 1,600 years.
Yeah.
Does that restart when a baby's born? I don't know. How does it affect the generations that come after? But I would definitely, I'm definitely going to do some more research on that, because I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know anything about this.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Like you say, think that you would have heard about it, but I mean, it took us 100 years to hear about this. So maybe we have to wait 100 more to hear about the children.
I guess. It's like a superhero movies where they're like being affected like 100 years down the line.
Yes. I mean, maybe that's where superheroes came out of.
Oh my god.
The children of the Radium Girls.
That would be crazy. What's a glow in the dark superhero? I just think of Green Lantern, but I don't think he glows.
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, it makes sense for him to glow. He's the Green Lantern. So
maybe he does.
I don't know.
Maybe he's a child of a Radium Girl.
Shoot.
There you go.
There you go. All right, let's play a game.
Okay.
So I have a list of events and a list of the years that they occur in. So you just got to put them in order.
Okay, 1898, Marie Curie discovers radium. And 1917, the Radium Dial Company opens in Newark, New Jersey. Newark, yeah.
Newark. Every time they said that, I thought they were saying New York, New Jersey.
Right.
And it got to the point where I'm like, wait, hold on. Is there a New York in New Jersey? Because I know there's a New York in New York.
Right.
So I'm
right.
confused.
1922, the first of the Radium Girls, Emilie Molly Megia, dies. 1925, Karen Schwab dies of radium poisoning. 1928, Grace Fryer sues the United States Radium Corporation. And 1933, the women win the trials against the company.
Okay. So you were very close. So you got the first three. 1925, Grace Fryer sues. You switched it the last second, too. And then 1928, the women win the trial. And then 1933, Catherine dies.
Oh.
So the trial was like on the cusp of 3 years. I think it was like January they won. But 2-3 years is a lot for them.
Yes.
Because they were at death's door. A day was a lot for them. So having it be a 3-year-long trial, one, ridiculous.
Yes.
Ridiculous for them to have to go through that long of a trial knowing... Like, obviously, the justice system's got to do their thing, but they could have sped it up a little bit.
Yeah, but they just literally recessed it and did nothing for
5 months
at a time.
It made me angry.
Mm-hmm.
But yay! 50%!
Yay!
So, are there anything that you personally would have done differently or would have changed when you were writing this book? Of course, this is a very detailed and historical book and more. She went to extensive research, but I think there's some like more narrative things I would have liked to see. For example, I really think that if she spends all this time doing all this research, collecting all this data, I really would have liked to see the real letters within the story, even pulling their handwriting in, or just taking a picture of the letters that were written and put them in the story. Because there's a lot of like letters between people or like moments where they're telling like journal entries and stuff. So I would have really liked to see the actual handwritten pictures. They did put some pictures in here of the girls, like in the middle of the book, which I did appreciate. It did add a little bit of realism, being able to see the actual girls. And then when they would talk about it, like there's a picture where they're sitting in front of the Radium Dial Company and they're taking like almost like a class photo. And when she was narrating in the book, you could actually like look at the picture and like go through and see it, which I do appreciate having the visuals. But I would have liked to see that little bit of realism within the story, which would again go towards that personal. I really don't have a lot. The other thing I said was that I really would have liked her to pick a side. Do we want to tell more of a historical nonfiction, or would we like to see more of a storytell basis? I think jumping back and forth was interesting, but I don't think it was very effective.
I agree. I also went back and looked at the pictures after reading some of the stuff because I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I think there was a picture of that. And she really went into detail. Like when they're talking about Catherine Donahue in her bed, there's a picture actually of her in her bed at the trial. And some of these letters would have been really nice to see in there because it would have made it more believable than just a story.
Mm-hmm.
The missed opportunity was make it more about just a group of certain women, so you had more information on them than to have so much information that it's almost overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the way that she told it was point A to point B, where it was like, okay, here are the girls, let's meet the girls, let's see what happens, let's see the outcome, the downfall, and then let's see the trial. Uh-huh. I think one really good storytelling ability is flashbacks almost, where the whole story takes place in the courtroom. From the start to the finish, it's the courtroom. And then as information comes out, we're seeing all these things happen where, like, if she wants more of a storytelling aspect,
yes,
we see all the things that are happening and we're like, okay, well, how did that happen? And then we fly back and, like, do, like, a history dump. But with it going in like one stagnant all the way to the end, things kind of fall through. During the court saying, we see this, but I'm like, I don't remember them ever saying this, but it's all the way at the front of the book. And I'm like, oh, right, yeah, we did go over that. So I think picking a side of like, do you want it historical or do you want it storytelling?
Yeah, I think she definitely went with more of the storytelling at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost read like two different books to me.
It does.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
It reads like a historical book in the beginning with just facts.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly facts and names. And then at the end, you hear more of the stories of certain women and their fight. Mm-hmm. And that's what really brings you into the book.
Yeah, the narrative switch definitely kind of throws you for a loop a little bit. Even skimming through this book, I was skipping ahead a little bit. And I was skimming through the part 3 and I was like, oh, there's like parts where it's he said, she said. And I'm like, oh, so we're going to like a narrative? Where we're actually like in the scene, but it doesn't fully dive into it, so it's kind of confusing.
I almost gave up on this book in the beginning.
Yeah,
because it was really hard for me to read and to focus. I would read a chapter and then have no idea what the chapter right before it, because it was just so much. This. No run on even. It was a lot.
There was no like correlation to bring you back to the information. Like a lot of information would go right over my head.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of information did go right over my head because I read the book itself. And sometimes I found myself trying to read it out loud to myself, so that I would try to retain more of the information. Yeah. And it didn't really even help.
Yeah. I mean, when you have all these names and all these numbers and dates, and I'm just like, okay, what day is it today? Because I don't even know anymore. Yeah, I definitely agree. I felt the same way. I did really like the book. I want to say preference on that. I did really like it. I really like history, so I like learning things that, unfortunately, we don't know anything about. Yeah. It was cool to go into this story and have a complete open mind. And, like, whenever I do anything on the podcast, I always go in blind, because I think it's a better experience that way. Going into this and not having a single clue what was about to happen, I was baffled at multiple points. And it has nothing to do with her storytelling ability and like how she jumped back and forth. I was just like, oh wow, okay.
I agree. I believe it was a good book, and I do believe people should read this book just to find out the history that you never knew anything about, and learn more about the things these girls went through. Oh, absolutely. And the way that it changed the way we live today. Mm-hmm.
And it should be regulated in school. This should be history we should know.
Yes. So, not like I don't understand why we read some crazy novel in school that's fictional. Yeah. When you have actual history that nobody knows about. The stuff you learned in history was so boring to me, because it doesn't feel like when you're in history class that the stuff you're learning about affects you today. Mm-hmm. Where if I would have learned this in history, I would feel like, oh my gosh, this has really affected women and the whole world today. You know, you learn about the Civil War, which obviously was a big thing, but did I retain any of that information? Absolutely not, because it didn't really seem like it affected me as much as living today.
Yeah. You know why they're not teaching this in school?
Why?
Because United States Radium Corporation bought off America and told them they can't tell the story in school. Oh. Because they're a snake.
Right? That makes sense. I mean, they did everything else they could.
Why stop there? Just keep going.
Are they still around?
No. Okay. I think their company went down, I want to say like in the 40s. Okay, good. So, yeah. So, unfortunately, it is time for us to go. It's time for us to go. But before we do one last thing. We do the rating scale. However, we do a little bit different here on the Book Stop. We make up our own thing. Who would have known? I would give The Radium Girls by Kate Moore 3.5 days of unpaid PTO from a company that refused to admit that they're killing me out of 5. Again, I really enjoyed this book to the sense that I love learning something new. Hearing the stories of these women and what they went through is so important, and I highly recommend it to anybody that wants to learn more. Going in with an open mind of this is something that did happen, even though it is trying to be pushed under the rug. Moore did a great job. She went into such great detail about things and did her research, and that's what's important. Yep, 3.5 out of 5. What would you rate this book?
I would rate this book probably a 3 Shining Girls out of 5. I believe everybody should read it. In my personal opinion, I wish I would have started the book at page 150. And then I would have probably given it more. Very hard in the beginning to get through it and to understand it. But once you get to the actual stories, justice for everybody, more of what these women were suffering through, it is absolutely a part of history that everybody should know.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the Book Stop.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I hope you had fun.
I did. It was fun.
Heck yeah. We don't have anything scheduled out for this year, but maybe you'll be on next year if you feel like doing another one.
Okay.
We'll have to do, what's another point in history? The Titanic. Should we read a book about the Titanic?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure I can find some obscure thing.
Yeah. Learning like the random things about history.
So do I.
A lot of people call it like the dark history. There's so much in the dark history that people have absolutely no idea about.
These are the kind of books that really draw me in usually, and I like to learn about this stuff. It is our history, and it makes us who we are today.
Great words of the wise. We'll leave it there for you guys. Thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast and listening. Again, 5 years, absolutely crazy.
Yay!
Yay! 5 claps. Look at that. We got together at the end there. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!
Thank you for turning the pages with us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, show your support by leaving a review, sharing the episode, and following the podcast on Instagram at The Book Stop Podcast. Join us on Patreon for early access to episodes and other additional content. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Hope you are too.